This lecture is looking at the structure of indirect rule. As a reminder, indirect rule is principally associated with the British. The idea here is to rule indirectly through so-called traditional authorities. Local leaders, local authorities at the village or regional or king level, and not European personnel, were given responsibility of regional administration and justice. So they were expected to draw on laws to maintain obedience and public order. And so, pardon me, in this way, think of it more like a pyramid or a triangle, where the British were at top, but as intermediary, there's a middle band in this pyramid between the British and everyday Indians or everyday Africans were local leadership. I had mentioned in an earlier lecture, looking at taxes, that there was this movie, this Bollywood movie called Lagan, and I was planning on embedding it in one of these videos, but it makes the YouTube video quite long, but the audio is just not very good because you're hearing it through the computer speakers, and it's not great. So if you have a Netflix account or access to one through a friend, and you want to look at the sections on taxes and on kind of indirect rule, so in the film, as a reminder, so if you want to do it, here are the timestamps for the sections that are relevant. As a reminder, this is a sports movie, a cricket movie. It's really great, but the idea in the scene that I was going to show you is these villagers who have their taxes raised, despite the fact that the monsoon has not come and likely won't come. And so they go to their local king, who's this guy here in this yellow turban, and they say, hey, can you do what you did last year and cut our tax? Make it so we don't have to pay our tax. And the king says, I'm sorry, it's not possible. The British are not going to budge on this. And this scene, this conversation is happening, is during this kind of garden party where some of the British soldiers are playing a game of cricket as a pastime. And so we see in the scene, just in the structure of the scene, the place of indirect rule, that these kings are socializing, hanging out with the British, they're benefiting from the relationship with the British, and the British soldiers are benefiting with their relationship with the king. Just as it happens, just a bit of kind of backstory and maybe motivation to go watch the movie or part of the movie. This guy in this red jacket here, he's sort of the villain of the movie. He has seen the main character in the Bollywood movie before, and there was kind of a conflict, and he's like, you want me to lower your taxes? You want me to drop your taxes? I will make it so you don't have to pay any taxes at all if you beat us in a game of cricket. And of course, the Indian villagers have never played this game before in their life, and they're hesitant because he says, if you lose, I will double your tax. And then he kind of raises a stake and goes, if you guys win, you don't have to pay taxes for 3 years, but if you lose, I'll triple your tax, which is effectively a death sentence. And so the rest of the movie is them learning how to play cricket, which they've never learned to play, and they kind of learn in part through this woman who teaches them the rules. And of course, like every sports movie out there, you kind of know the outcome. Let's unpack a little bit, stepping away from the film, let's unpack this notion of dependence. So this king, let's say for instance pre-colonial times, the king would be in conflict potentially with neighboring states, and there was no guarantee that his children would take over the state, because maybe their kingdom would get absorbed into another one, or there would be some sort of collapse of some other kind. And so it was this continuous existential threat But the British come in, they go to the local leaders like this king here, and they say, hey, you can keep your territory forever, as long as you send me tax. And this leads to the kings getting great assurances and job security, and money that would be going to fighting neighboring kings could be kept. So this leads to this soft life and stable borders, and therefore it's in their interest. It's in these what become known as princely states. It's in the princely states' interest to keep the British too. This system of indirect rule was kind of the brainchild, if you will, of Frederick Lugard, this fellow here at right. It is safer, it's cheaper. It's safer in that if there is animus by local populations to policies, it's targeted at the local leaders, not at the British. So people get mad at their local kings and village chiefs and so forth, but not at the colonial power. So it's kind of has that benefit. It's also cheaper because all of these local leaders are in effect raising their own salaries and doing the administrative work. I think one thing that is worth looking at here is what indirect rule reveals about the real intents of colonialism. If the real intent of colonialism was to uplift, and I'm putting that in quotes here, uplift barbaric and uncivilized savage peoples and by teaching them about Western norms and values and religions and so forth, then you don't use indirect rule because they're never going to learn any of that stuff. They're just going to, life will continue on as it was before. So there is something revealed here with the widespread nature of indirect rule is that it doesn't align with paternalistic views. And what it does therefore reveal is that the real goal here is stability and economic wealth for the individuals running the empire and prestige for the colonial state, not about moral or educational uplift of colonized people. There's one problem or incorrect assumption about indirect rule. Indirect rule is presupposed that there are chiefs or kings, and you just need to find that chief or king, and you make a deal with them, and they run things as it was, and you collect, you skim a little off the top, if you will. So, fundamental to the logic of this colonial structure of indirect rule is there are lots and lots and lots of geographically distinct, centrally ruled tribes or kingdoms. But colonial reality is that there are lots of different economic structures and political structures. Political structures, not economic structures. So if we just look at, these are cases from Africa, you have, hierarchical systems like Congo, Dahomey, and Sokoto. And that would work quite well with indirect rule. But what do you do when there's a village-based council, when there's like 15 people that make the decisions? What about when there is something like the Berbers or the Tuaregs who are more nomadic? You can't just say, well, I'm going to work with the chief who controls this territory because their territory is seasonal, either nomadic or semi-nomadic. So pre-colonial Africa, if we just take Africa as a case, more than 10,000 different states and political entities prior to colonization. So these are, if you will, the borders of pre-colonial Africa. We look at India, there's 450 languages spoken in India today. 450 languages spoken in India today. So the indirect rule seems great if you're in a situation where there is a clear leader that you can tap into and have a mutually beneficial relationship. Well, mutually beneficial for the king and the British, not so beneficial potentially for people below them. And we'll unpack in the next lecture the negative effects of indirect rule